I guess my starting point is that equality is now the mantra of the UK and indeed global LGBT plus movement. So the idea that equality is not enough is very controversial and challenging. But I've got to say that although equality has much to recommend it, I don't feel comfortable with the way most of our community has lowered its aspirations to the limited goal of equal rights. They are important, of course, but my argument is they are not enough. I ask the question, whatever happened to the lofty ideals of queer liberation and sexual freedom? Where did they go? I think we have too often moved away from defining our needs on our terms and instead fallen rather meekly into the prevailing heterosexual consensus. So look at same-sex marriage. Of course, winning marriage equality was tremendously important, and I was spearheading that campaign from way back in 1992. So I agree that homophobic discrimination against same-sex couples is wrong, that it had to be challenged and defeated because it was a form of anti-LGBT plus discrimination. But then I would ask the question is, do we really think that the model of marriage is the best method or the best framework for acknowledging and recognizing relationships, whether they be opposite sex or same sex? My argument would be that if we were just starting from scratch, I don't think the marriage model would be the one that we would adopt. It is too dogmatic and inflexible. It is one size fits all. So regardless of different diverse relationships and lifestyles, the marriage model and its younger sibling civil partnerships, which are essentially marriage light, they are based upon a long historic tradition of the way in which the law recognizes relationships. But my argument is, I think we need a more democratic, egalitarian alternative. And I've written about this in detail. I won't go into the particulars right now, but I do think that the way in which we just conceded the argument that marriage is the gold standard, that it is the be-all and end-all, the acme, the paramount version of relationship recognition, I think shows a lack of imagination and indeed a bowing down before a model of relationship recognition and rights that was devised by straight people, not by us. We can perhaps come back to that during the Q&A. The end result of merely accepting equality is that the dominant agenda is about equal rights and law reform rather than transforming society. So we don't question what is, we simply want equality within the status quo. And this is very much an agenda about conformism and assimilation. It doesn't suggest or acknowledge that we queers, out of our history and experience, may have better ideas, may have alternatives that we could produce instead of what exists. And I think that this political retreat represents a massive loss of imagination, confidence, and vision. I want to repeat that equality is important, but my argument is it's not sufficient. It's not the panacea that many people claim. Now, equality for LGBT plus people inevitably means parity on straight terms within a pre-existing framework of values, laws, and institutions. These have been devised by and for the straight majority, not by us. Equality within their system involves conformity to their rules. And I think this is a recipe for submission and incorporation, not genuine queer liberation. So to give another example, we often hear the cry that we want LGBT plus inclusive relationship and sex education in schools. And of course we do, but we don't want the current existing framework, which is inadequate, whether the pupils are gay, straight, bisexual, trans, non-binary, or whatever. You know, the current framework for relationship and sex education in schools is not good enough for anyone. So merely seeking equality within that system as it exists is not good enough. We're letting down not only LGBT plus pupils, but also we're letting down straight pupils as well. So I want to say that although getting rid of homophobic discrimination is a very laudable aim, which I support, it doesn't go far enough. Ending anti-LGBT plus bias will not resolve all the problems faced by queer people. Some of our difficulties arise not simply from homophobia, biphobia, or transphobia, but also from the more general erotophobic and sex negative nature of contemporary culture. And that also harms straight and cisgender people as well. So you can see this in the way in which puritanical, sex negative attitudes are evident in the censorship of sexual imagery, in the inadequacy of sex education lessons, as I've just mentioned, in the criminalization of sex workers, in the outlawing of consensual sadomasochistic relationships, and of course, in the criminalization of teenagers of similar ages who have sex with each other before the lawful age of consent of 16. In all those different ways, we can see that the anti-sex culture, which is still quite deeply ingrained in our society, not as bad as it was 50 years ago for sure, but it's still there and still has a negative impact. And I want to emphasize again that the drawbacks associated with seeking mere equality are not limited to our community. They also apply to women who are usually forced to compete on male terms to get ahead in the workplace. They also apply to Black people who tend to only succeed if they adopt a white middle-class lifestyle and assimilate into the dominant European culture. As both women and ethnic minorities have discovered to their cost, the equal rights agenda is not about respecting difference and validating it. It's mostly about obliterating it. So where is the dignity in that? How can we have self-respect if we sacrifice our queer identity and our queer culture for the sake of parity? It is acceptance, that is true, but acceptance at a price that I would say is not worth paying. Moreover, equal rights does not equate with genuine freedom. So again, for example, despite formal legal equality between the sexes in Britain for decades, women's earnings are still only about 4/5 of men. Only about 4/5 of men. And of course, likewise, over 50 years after the end of racially discriminatory statutes in the United States, informal segregation affecting Black communities persists. It's not enforced by segregation like it once was, but there's an informal segregation based often on economic inequality, where Black and white communities often live very separate lives. And of course, as the Black Lives Matter movement has shown, police brutality and murders are still commonplace, just like they were in the 1950s and 60s. And poor Black people in America are still locked out of economic success. So I guess these lessons are lessons that we queers have to take on board. We ignore them at our peril. The same fate will befall us if we jump on the limited agenda of equality. We will end up with equal rights, that is true, and that will be an advance, but within a fundamentally flawed, unjust society, where for us, the rules are skewed against sexual choice and self-determination. The rules are skewed against our own unique insights, experiences, and lifestyle relationship models. Equality for queers is a political deal that leads to social assimilation. We assimilate into, we accommodate to, we fit in with society as it is. And that implies that we ourselves are pretty much worthless, that we have nothing to give society. It's society has to give to us the gift of equal rights. So if we go down that road, of course, a condition of equal treatment is that LGBT plus people are expected to conform to the straight system, to its norms and aspirations. And so, one thing we've seen very much in our community in recent years is the increased importance and significance of same-sex parenting. Now, again, I've championed that cause and will fight to my death to stop people who want to have children being denied it because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. But I think also we need to ask, why is it that so many people think, or in our community think, that without having children, they are somehow incomplete? Now, I accept that for some people, there's a really strong urge to have children, and I will defend their right and support them. But I just question about the vogue for having kids in our community. Again, it has a whiff that we are just so desperate to fit in with the straight model of family life, which may have its virtues and its value, but I think we also need to be critical and skeptical. I think we are witnessing the increasing co-option and invisibilization of LGBT plus people. You can say we are more everywhere than ever before on TV and in public life, that's true. But we are there as facsimiles of straight people and their values, lifestyles, and aspirations. So the end result is that we get equality, but the price we pay is the surrender of our own unique, distinctive queerness. The insights and ethics that have forged our response to being excluded and discriminated against by a hostile straight world. Out of this suffering, we have developed worthwhile understandings, insights, experiences, and other ways of living which straight people could learn from. And I think we need to hold on to that. I think we also need to acknowledge that the unwritten, unspoken social contract at the heart of LGBT plus equality and law reform is that we queers will behave respectably, that we will be the good model citizens that straight society expects, that we will comply with the heterosexual moral agenda. So no more cruising, no more orgies, no more sex clubs, no more sadomasochism. And even if none of that is the thing that you love or the thing that turns you on, I think we need to defend the right of others who do. In return, I suppose the contract is that the good gays get equal treatment. Meanwhile, perhaps not all, but at least some of the sex repressive social structures, laws, values, institutions remain intact, and the bad guys remain sexual outlaws. This kind of LGBT plus reformism involves an abandonment of any critical perspective on straight culture. We don't distinguish between the good aspects and the bad aspects. We don't make an assessment about what is worthy of queer emulation and what is not. So in place of a healthy skepticism, which I think is a great public virtue, in place of a healthy skepticism towards the heterosexual consensus, we're substituting a naive acquiescence. Discernment is abandoned in favor of compliance. We trade our souls for the gift of equal rights. The truth is that increasingly today, most advocates of LGBT plus equality never question the status quo. They take it for granted. They assume that is where it is. They are straight minds trapped in queer bodies. Accepting society as it is, these hetero homos want nothing more than their cozy place in the queer sun, in the straight sun. Most are all too willing to mimic heterosexual norms and values. And as I said, we discard or put to one side the attempt to distinguish between those elements of straight culture that it is good to follow and emulate and those that are not. All that matters is parity. Now, this may be equality, and it certainly would be progress, but it's not liberation. I want to go back to the point that I made about what we can bring straight people and culture. We should never forget that gay, bisexual, and trans men have shown straight and cisgender men a new way of being a man. We don't, in general, normally conform to the machismo and the macho style, the toxic masculinity that has historically been associated with heterosexual maleness. We have evolved a new way of being a man, which goes beyond merely not having sex with a person of the opposite sex. As a general rule, of course, there are exceptions. I would say that gay and bisexual men tend to be more in tune with their emotions and feelings. They're less uptight, less cold, more emotional. And of course, there are gay men and bisexual men who are very macho and ultra masculine and even toxic. But they're, I think, the exception. And this departure from straight norms or expectations or behaviors or feelings is one of the reasons why gay and bisexual men are disproportionately represented in the creative, artistic, and caring professions. In those professions, you have to be in touch with your feelings to do your job well, to be successful. Conversely, if we look at lesbian, bisexual, and trans women, again, they have shown a different new way of being a woman. They've challenged the orthodoxy, the feminine stereotype, the way in which women are expected to behave, which again goes beyond the mere fact that they don't sexually relate to men. It's about a much bigger psychological, emotional mindset. Again, we don't want to stereotype and overgeneralize, but I would say that these women tend to be more independent, less dependent on men, often more assertive. And that is why lesbian and bisexual women, again, have been disproportionately represented in battles for women's equality. Look at the disproportionate number of lesbians and bisexual women involved in the suffragette movement, or more recently in the 1970s in the battle to open up all male occupations to women. I had lots of lesbian friends who were involved in the campaign for women in manual trades, so that women could get apprentices to learn to be plumbers, electricians, carpenters, and bricklayers. Looking around at that campaign, a very high proportion of those women, far more than the proportion of lesbian and bi women in the population, they were lesbian and bisexual women. They pioneered women's advancement, which paved the way for straight and cisgender women to follow. So again, what I'm trying to say is we as a community have so much to give. We shouldn't undervalue ourselves, our own achievements, our insights. The fact that we can teach straight and cisgender people a lot of positive things. So it isn't just about equal rights. It isn't just about fitting in with their system. It's about changing their system. And I'm so proud that so many of our members of our community have, through the ages, been pioneers for social reform and change, not just on issues of sexuality and gender identity, but on issues of women's rights, Black rights, and many other struggles for social reform. So that's why I say today that queer liberation is important, that talking about transforming society is something we must get back to. Equality alone is not enough. We need to have broader, bolder horizons and think about what could be rather than accept what is. Thank you.